percentages of increase and decrease. We're going to work with 10% increases and decreases. 10% is great to work with because you can easily learn how to make 10% of any number. So we want to take 10% of 220, and then we want to increase it by 10%. So first, 220 represents 100%. That's the original number. 10% of 220, we basically take 220 and divide it by 10. And we end up with 22. Okay, so 22 is actually the 10%. Now we want to make an increase. So we're going to add these together. 2 and 0 is 2. 2 and 2 is 4. And 2. So 242 represents 110%, or should I say a 10% increase from 220. Next, we're going to make a 10% increase in 320. So 320 represents 100%. That's the original. To make 10% of this, we can divide this by 10. We will get 32. We're going to add this. Again, 32 is 10%. Adding these, 0 plus 2, we get 2. 2 plus 3, we get 5, and 3. This 352 represents 110%, or should I say a 10% increase in the original. Okay. All right, now let's do a couple of decreases. So let's say we have 240 and we want a 10% decrease. 240, make sure to write this down, represents 100% of the original amount. That's 100%. A 10% would be 240 divided by 10, which is 24. This is 10%. Now for a decrease, we're going to subtract. We cannot take 4 from 0, so we're going to borrow from the 4 here and make this a 3. This goes. This becomes a 10. And then this goes. 4 from 10 leaves 6. 2 from 3 leaves 1 and 2. This right here, 216, represents 90%, or should I say a 10% decrease. Okay, 340 with a 10% decrease. 340 represents 100%, or the original amount. 10% of 340 will be 34. This represents 10%. A decrease we'll find by subtracting. So I cannot take 4 from 0. So I must borrow from the 4, make this a 3. This becomes a 10. It cancels. Okay, 4 from 10 leaves 6. 3 from 3 is 0. And 3 comes down. 306 represents 90%, or a 10% decrease from the original. Okay. Okay, let's look at another 10% increase. 420. 420 represents the original amount, or should I say 100%. 10% of 420 will be 42. Okay, and we're going to increase this. Well, again, 42 represents 10%. So to increase it, we're going to add them together. 2 and 0 make 2. 4 and 2 make 6. And then 4 here. 462 represents 110% of the original, which is a 10% increase in the original 420. 520, we want a 10% increase. So 520 is the original amount, so that's 100%. 10% of 520 will be 52. Okay. That represents 10%. So when we subtract here, we cannot take 2 from 0. So we'll borrow from the 2, and that'll make it a 1. And the 0 becomes a 10. Okay. So now we can take 2 from 10, we'll get 8. Okay. We cannot take 5 from 1, so we borrow from the 5 here, and it becomes a 4. And the 1 now becomes a 11. So 5 from 11 leaves 6. And then this is 4. So 468 represents 90% of the original 520. Also, to do an increase with that. Sorry, I'm subtracting and should be adding. So let's go back and redo this. Increase. Sorry about that. Okay, so once again, 520 and 52. We're going to increase it. So we have add the 0 and the 2, we get 2. Add the 2 and the 5, we get 7. And add the 5, we get 5. And this should be 110%. Okay. All right, we did a decrease by accident. All right, now let's really do a decrease. We have 440, which represents 100% of the original. 10% would be 44. So that's 40. That's 10% right there. We're going to do a decrease, so we're going to subtract. Okay, so cannot take 4 from 0, so we're going to make that. So we'll borrow from here. Let's make that a 3. And now this becomes a 10. And 4 from 10, let's get rid of 0. 4 from 10 leaves 6. We cannot take 4 from 3. 3 is too small, so we borrow again. And this becomes a 3 here. This becomes a 13. That's away. And 4 from 13 leaves 9. And 3 comes down. So we have 396. This represents 90% of the original 440, given a 10% decrease. And finally, 540 with a 10% decrease. Well, 540 represents 100%. And 54 represents 10%. We'll subtract these, and we cannot take 4 from 0, so we'll borrow from 4. This now becomes a 3. And this becomes a 10. So 4 from 10 leaves 6. We cannot take 5 from 3, too small, so we borrow from 5. It becomes a 4, and the 3 becomes a 13. So now 5 from 13 gives us 8, and 4 here comes down. So 486 represents 90%.